Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roane. Let's jump right in. Cameras are working, microphones are working, and we're out for episode 61. Can you believe it?
61 episodes, dude. How do we come up with that much to talk about? We're
don't lie, man. We could both talk each other to death.
We could. I mean, we could do this all day and just keep going. I think it seems to be helpful. The responses and the replies, the emails and the comments that people that I see in person talk about how they love the podcast. So it seems to be doing some good. Maybe I know it's good for us just to sit here and shoot the stuff. We could do that all day long. It's fun.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, man. I think is the power of authentic conversation in the addiction and recovery community. It isn't one way, it's two way. The people who are revealing, the people who are receiving, there's power in both. And I'm just grateful to be able to do this with you. And especially on days like today, where we're going to dig into a word that is very Christian, is thrown around a lot, especially immediately after betrayal. It's used by the betraying and the betrayed, and then the therapist is trying to figure out how we decode this word. So hopefully today's going to be a helpful episode for those not only that are in the initial phases of their recovery and trying to maybe save their key relationships, but also people who have been at this work for a really long time. And it's one of those things that I think if you get it wrong in the beginning, it's going to stay wrong for a really, really long time. So today, I think is going to be helpful for many people as we discuss the idea and the concept, but also the reality of grace. What does grace actually mean on the backside of betrayal inside of a marriage? And for that matter, what does grace over our entire story mean? As we always say, there are 1,000 different roads we could walk over the next 35, 40 minutes. So we just want to see where this goes today. So in your multi-decade history of working with people, because you are in your mid-80s, we can say these things now.
Yes, no doubt. A lot of wisdom.
You've seen this go sideways a bunch with people misusing this word. Obviously, spiritual bypass will be a part of this episode today. Where do you want to take this in the beginning? That's the question.
Amazing grace. How sweet the sound, right? I mean, right. Everybody knows that song.
We do.
And certainly, as you said, I think a lot of times, is the Christian words, the Christianese, and certainly grace is not that. It's a fundamental concept, a fundamental theological concept in our Christian faith. However, because it's kind of thrown around, we hear it a lot. It's kind of like, in Genesis when the talking snake shows up. I mean, we read that story and, oh yeah, talking serpent and blah, 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 blah. And like, wait a minute. There's a talking snake. What's going on here? I'm in a Chronicles of Narnia episode or Lord of the Rings or something. And I think with a lot of these types of things, it just gets real familiar, maybe too familiar. And then it kind of gets taken for granted. It can get weaponized. There's a lot of things that happen. And so certainly today, just kind of like practically speaking, and certainly when it comes to recovery, and the pain and the trauma and the betrayal and all of the consequences that go along with this, grace really is something that we need to kind of understand, and then what does it look like from a practical standpoint to live that out. And as you said, you mentioned the term spiritual bypass. That's certainly one of the things it's real easy to do in Christendom, where we just kind of will throw these platitudes at something and basically just really want to sweep it under the rug. Don't
Mm-mm.
work through it. Don't process it. Let's just put some Bible band-aids on it, and then everybody's okay as long as we don't ever talk about it again. And in our experience, man, that's kind of a ticking time bomb. It's just kicking the can down the road, because if you don't work through it, if you don't begin to deal with this stuff, chances are it's going to be the life lived by the directions on a shampoo bottle: lather, rinse, repeat. And
Mm.
so that's why all of this is so important, to where we really like, how does this practically play out in a marriage, in a coupleship, when all hell's broken loose, and betrayal's on the table, and now what do we do? Just well, you just you just need to grant me grace, honey. Yep. You're not a very good Christian, right?
Mm-mm.
That's probably not going to fly, because it's just the humanity, the reality of how, man, this stuff that we experience, that we go through. I mean, it is pain at the deepest level, and the crisis that a couple experiences with this is, I don't think there's any greater crisis in a marriage, short of the loss of a child. Certainly, that's a maybe a greater crisis. And then, facing death, cancer, as you have just
Easy,
recently
easy.
explored. But these major crises, and certainly betrayal is that. And so now, when this has happened, now what do we do? Just put a Bible Band-Aid on it, and keep moving down the road, and sing "Every Day with Jesus is Sweeter Than the Day Before." That was not our experience, and
Mm.
it is not the experience of so many others. So the concept of grace, and then how does that play out in a marriage when there has been infidelity, in whatever form that takes, whether it's porn, or an adultery. Don't. I, I'm just not going to use the word affair any longer. Let's
Mm.
call it what it is. Affair just sounds so romantic and like a Hollywood Nicholas Sparks movie. Nope, we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it what it really is. And so, how does grace play out? And I think in our experience, that was a process of like granting grace to the other, and it works both ways. For me, when I admitted everything to Eva, um, and she's talked about this. We talk about it in the book. She was, the way that her grace came out was in the wrath of God, right? She often says, I think we heard William Paul Young talk about this, that my wife she is the love of God, and she is the wrath of God. And so I experienced that as she would rage and get physical. And so, I had to have grace for that. Yes,
Mm.
I had done bad. I had done wrong. However, she was not off the hook in her sin, and how she dealt with this. Now, again, we don't want to kind of, boy, it's like we'll start getting emails from betrayed partners that somehow we're just like saying, you've got to act right and do it all right, just give grace. Please do not hear it that way. However, there are behaviors, there are things that we all do that make us sinful human beings.
Mm.
And just because I did what I did, that does not negate Eva's own humanity, her brokenness, and her own sin. And so grace plays in on each side. And that's one of the things that we see so often because, my sin was greater, which, biblically, there's no such thing as that. There are consequences that are greater. However, in God's economy, sin is sin is sin, right? And so the consequences of my sin were greater, but the things that she was doing and saying and how, I was being treated in my brokenness. Certainly, she was hurt. She was in pain. Her anger was righteous, no doubt. But there are ways to handle anger, hurt, and pain. Obviously, we're called to a biblical standard. There is a model. There is a way. And again, it cuts both ways in this process. And it's one of the things that we see so often. It's like, you know, us betrayers, we're the worst of the worst. We caused famines in Ethiopia and wars in third world countries, and our partners are just pristine, holy. I mean, the female Jesuses, but that's not reality. We're all
Mm,
broken. And so how do we do this grace thing from a practical standpoint in the midst of crisis? And again, some of this, early on, all you're doing is just trying to survive, right?
mm,
Everybody's emotionally dysregulated. You can't even think straight. You're not sleeping. You want to throw up about every 20 minutes. And so we're in crisis, and we've got to get to some form place of stability in order to even be able to talk about this. And even I always say, you we're not going to go there too early. We want to do it kind of like Goldilocks. We want to do that just right because
mm.
the hurt has to be comforted. And so I always, and I'm just going to use the husband as the betrayer.
Sure.
However, we also always have to keep in mind there are women that are betrayers. I think probably one of the most neglected areas in counseling world and sexual brokenness world and all of this stuff are betrayed husbands because there's a
Mm,
lot of those, and they don't get a lot of airtime. Everything is focused on the betrayed wife, and that's okay, except the hurt, the pain, the trauma the betrayed husbands experience is just as bad as betrayed wives. But there's just not a lot out there for those guys, the guys, husbands that have been betrayed.
hmm
And so you got to comfort that hurt, and then we've got to begin to work through the relational dynamics, because we always say, man, the things that are now magnified and amplified in crisis, those things were going on relationally before anything ever came out. Now, they may not have been exaggerated, they may not have been as pronounced, but the dynamics were there. And that's where we're headed. And certainly in that journey to true intimacy, the grace piece is going to be a critical component, not only to grant grace to the other, but to be able to accept grace from God and from the other. Because so
hmm
often, man, the shame that we feel is like, I hear it all the time. You hear it all the time. I cannot forgive myself. And boy, that is
Exactly.
just not even, I mean, that's not a biblical concept.
That's right.
But it's
Well,
just shame.
you said a mouthful there. I want to make sure we don't blow past this too quick. But the definitions of these words, and I think this will be freeing for people listening today. And The definition of these words is set a long time before you ever get married. A long time before you ever start to engage romantically, you have a general concept of these big ideas like forgiveness or grace or deserving. Those things are already set. And when they start flying around in this time of crisis where the pain has not been addressed, has not been given a place, and that takes time, that's so difficult because in all honesty, both sides of the couple want to get to resolve. I mean, you're right. When you want to throw up every 20 minutes, then 1 week feels like 2 years. That's why people say, oh, man, we've been going to therapy for this. And
Hmm.
what they mean is we've been in therapy for 2 months, going once every other week. But it feels like they have been in this crisis for ages. So when you start slinging grace around, then you have to take some time. And this is where I'm headed with this. In order for ownership to occur, then you have to own your definitions of these words that are flying around, even the way that you're interpreting the words that the therapist is speaking into your marriage at that time. And I know we've made fun of this over and over again, and we need to keep making fun of it. But a
We
grace
will.
sheet or a forgiveness sheet or a Jesus sheet. I mean, that's just not the way the human heart works or the soul works. So
Mm-mm.
I'd kind of like to take a little bit of different approach today, and then to ask you, because you described that moment so vividly, where you're in Atlanta and you look at Eva and say, "I've got a problem with pornography." Your definition at that time in your life, being raised by wolves and wolves that you love, but wolves nonetheless.
Yes.
Uh, what was your understanding of grace at that time? How is it different today than it was back then?
Mm. Man, I think, it's a great question. I would say probably my definition of grace, at that time, um, I I would probably give you the Sunday school answer. It would be Jesus, right? I had enough of the knowledge, because I'm a reader. I was ambushed by Jesus at 20 years old, and so now I'm 28. We're living in Atlanta, and I mean, and we were very involved in church and going to church, and every time the doors were open. And then I'm also a reader, and so, I had a concept of it, but I did not know the reality of that.
Mm,
And even in the, like, coming to Jesus, being ambushed by Jesus, I had a basic understanding, that, like, man, Jesus died for me. My sins were forgiven, all the good stuff, far as the east is from the west. But that part of me that I could not, be perfect at, that I kept failing, in my addiction, boy, that was the shame, that, kept eating my lunch. And
mm,
so I would say that, today I understand that, grace is not something that I don't believe that you can kind of conceive of, perceive in your mind. It it's kinda like forgiveness. It has to be received, and it has to come from an external source. And I think a lot of times we can have that in our concept of, like, okay, God grants me grace, and I am forgiven, and I am in right standing. But until I began to get connected, begin to, go start seeing my therapist, and
mhm,
then started going to group, and until I began to experience Jesus with skin on, as we say,
mhm,
um, I began to actually feel and internalize, that reality, because grace was real. I was forgiven. All of that happened, but it was the moving, into more, like, from the head knowledge to the heart knowledge of it. And so the feeling of I am forgiven, and I am, thank God for grace. I'm under grace. That that took time as I began to develop intimate relationships with other men, not sex, but in these groups, in all the stuff that I was doing. And I had men that began to speak into my life, the reality of grace. And so
Mm.
that's, to me, is when it kind of began to sink in. I was able to kind of understand the things that were preventing me from receiving that in my gut, as I call it. Um, and because those are, as we talk about often, those old messages that says I'm not enough, God could never love me, look at what I've done, and all of those toxic shame messages. And then when I began to identify those as for what they are, the lies from the father of lies, and then I began to replace that with the truth of who God says I am. I'm a beloved son, all the good stuff. And then I began to see it in through the eyes of other men, as they would look me in the eye and say, "Man, I love you. I'm with you. I don't judge you. I've done many of the same things, probably worse." All of those things that bring us to the acceptance of grace, and that's the emotional side that I believe when James tells us in James 5:16, pretty simple, confess your sins one to another so that you may be healed. Well, it's the healing of the shame as we sit with others and we have, Jesus looking into our eyes through the eye. Obviously it's not literally him, but if we believe that he lives in our hearts, maybe it is him and he is speaking directly to me face to face, and I began to believe it and receive that. And so I think it's just kind of this process where we are putting ourselves in a position to really begin to accept it as we receive it. But I don't think that happens in your prayer closet either.
Mm. We'll be right back. Going to take a break, and you'll hear from our sponsors.
This episode of Sex, God, and Chaos is brought to you by Hope Quest Ministries, home of the Trek program, a 12-week residential recovery experience for men struggling with sexual addiction, pornography, or other life-dominating behaviors. If you've tried to change on your own and keep ending up in the same cycles, Trek is different. It's not a boot camp, and it's not a Band-Aid. It's a Christ-centered, clinically excellent environment where men learn to face the real story behind their struggle, to heal, not just to stop. Trek helps men uncover the emotional wounds, patterns, and beliefs that keep them stuck, and then rebuild their lives on truth, accountability, and grace. It's designed for men who want freedom that lasts, not just from addiction, but toward purpose, integrity, and restored relationships. I've seen what happens when a man finally stops pretending, gets honest, and lets God rebuild him from the inside out. That's what Hope Quest does every single day. If you or someone you love needs help, don't wait for rock bottom. Visit hopequestgroup.org to learn more about the Trek program and talk with someone who understands what you're walking through. That's hopequestgroup.org, because real recovery isn't about hiding the chaos. It's about finding hope in the middle of it.
So what you're bringing up here, the idea of grace as an intellectual concept or grace as a relational concept, and man, could I have predicted that? You're a relationship guy. I can count on both hands, actually, in this past week, the number of times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I show my wife, Roane's calling me again. Right? She's like,
I'm very annoying, actually.
We are
very
going to
annoying.
be connected, right? But I think what you're pointing out here is actually brilliant, and it's made a big difference in my life. We talk about the deck all the time. I've sat on that couch behind you as a client, and we've experienced friendship for years now. I can understand grace as an intellectual concept, but until I understand it as a relational concept, and that's the original intention of God, who created this whole experiment, then I'm going to miss it. And I think it's very important to point out when we have betrayed someone, and I know this is a very rudimentary way to describe this, but we have fractured relationship with that person. And then we very quickly after that fracture are asking them to produce grace. Then we misunderstand grace. We need to be connected in relationship for that grace to actually transmit, as you say beautifully, both ways, one person to the other person and in the reverse, then we have to do what's required to reestablish relationship. And I know there's a rug in your office where you take couples and say, all right, let's stand on this rug. Let's talk about how to reestablish relationship here. And this is why it's so important for our listeners to understand. We're going to fight for men. We're going to defend men. We're going to stand up for the places where men are being wrongly demonized because of the world that we're living in and the choices that we've made. However, we are going to acknowledge that those men have a responsibility and the spouses have a responsibility. This is where we get back to ownership. So if I understand grace as a relational concept, then this is how I talk to my clients about it. You have to see that grace is at the very least two things. It's pardon, but it's also power. That the God of the universe, the God of Christianity, would not give us something in pardon that we could not live out of for the rest of our lives. And we can't do that on our own. We have to experience the power of God inside of us to be able to look at our spouse that is desperately hurt, male or female, whichever way the betrayal occurred, and say, you know what, I'm going to stick in this relationship and I'm going to eat this sandwich right now because this is the phase of our recovery that we're in. Now, if you're in that years down the road, we got a problem.
Yes.
But if you're in the initial phases, then you need to take whatever name he or she is calling you, whatever side of the house they're asking you to sleep on, however much they're checking in on you for Life 360, then you are actually exercising over the relationship the thing that you eventually desire to have in the relationship. That's leadership. That's what you're doing there to say, I'm going to give you something that I hope to receive in return. When you're ready, we will get there and I will stay in this as long as it takes. It's that relational component. And when we feel that from other men, and I would suggest for both genders, the both genders that actually exist, I would suggest that you experience that with your gender first. That way you don't present to your spouse, to your significant other, needy. I've got to experience it in a community of my like gender before I go to my spouse and ask for it from them. Because here's what I found out. I found out over time that my wife could offer me grace and I'm still internally rejecting it because it doesn't meet the actual need. I've got to feel grace and acceptance and a lack of judgment and the come alongside from other men because it meets the deepest part of that need for validation. So I guess I'm just offering out there that if you're sitting in a therapist office, you're like, man, if she would just let me off the freaking hook, if she would just give me a little grace. I mean, I've known her since we were kids. She screwed up plenty. Well, no wonder, because you've probably never experienced it from other men who are able to say, and boy, this is a loaded statement, but we say it frequently, to able to look at other men and say, hear from them, yeah, man, me too. Me too. I have hurt in ridiculous ways the people in this world that I love the most, and I know what you're feeling, but it doesn't mean that core belief that you're unlovable is actually true. Hang in there. Hang in there. You know, we're going to get through this. That relational component, it just changes everything, but it doesn't change everything instantly.
Well, and I think oftentimes, boy, I know for me, just all the hell that we went through, and I call it the 2 years of living hell, and then we get divorced, and then we get remarried, and we kind of tell that story, and it's like, well, after we got remarried, it was all just hunky dory, and everything just worked out great, right? And we lived happily ever after.
Who says
You know,
hunky dory anymore? What are you,
God,
100?
I did it again. I've been hanging around my old buddy Phil Harden. That's the problem.
I'm sorry, continue.
Yes, thank you. Gosh, dog it. But it's like we did not. It wasn't all sunshine and roses, right? And I tell guys all the time, even with the wife sitting here on the couch. Now I don't do this early on. I've gotten to know them, and hopefully they trust me. Hopefully, but I'll look at the guy and I'll kind of do my hand like this, like I'm just whispering to him. And the wife's sitting right there, actually.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I'll say, hey, I don't know if you know this or not, but like, man, wives, they don't always act right. And like he'll look like you just said that out loud in front of her, and then she's like, "What are you talking about?" And
Right.
I'm making the point that like, man, if if I'm doing my work, if I'm wanting to become a better man, because somehow, if I I do it all right, man, she's just going to be perfect, and she's never going to say any negative thing to me, and she's always going to affirm me and validate me, which is nothing more than the porn fantasy that we were chasing, right? Because that's not
Mm,
reality. And
mm,
and my point in that is that, you know what, she's human. Even if she has gotten to this place of just, man, forgiveness and grace and all the good stuff and living that out, well, guess what? She's still not going to act right. And neither are you, when I'm doing this with a couple. And so part of it is just this idea, like the goal in all of this is not, the performance trap. I mean, we lived that life. That was part of our old false self. The goal in all of this is just to be able to gain the tools, be able to slow this stuff down, be able to talk about it without losing our minds, and be emotionally regulated and relationally functional. That's a whole person. And so Eva's going to say things that I don't like. And I'm going to do the same, probably a whole lot more than she does.
yep.
But
Yep.
yeah, there's no doubt. However, if I were to do that and she were to say to me, when you said that, that was hurtful, uh, I can look at her and go, "Oh gosh, babe, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I don't want to hurt you. I love you dearly. I love doing life with you." And so I want to be able to like own the things I need to own, because I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to blow it probably in the next 10 minutes.
Mm,
Um, but I can own it when I need to own it. Don't ever own something that you have not done. All that is a recipe for resentment. And so I can own what I need to own, and then she can accept my ownership, and we can resolve things pretty darn quickly, right?
yeah.
It's not that it's not that you're not going to have things to resolve. That's kind of one of the myths, I think, just even in marriage in general. No, there's always going to be something, because it's a cat and a dog living together in a dryer that's on high. And so I've
I love
got
how
to
this
be able.
this metaphor keeps expanding.
It does. I just keep going.
Yeah.
But I've got to be able to, like, I've got to be aware. I've got to know what's going on inside of me. I got to understand where that's coming from.
Hmm.
And part of that even goes back to, like, I have grace for myself, right? Knowing that I'm going to blow it, I'm going to screw up. But boy, I can do what's required in order to do the repair work.
So let's talk about this order. I think closing out this episode, I think that is actually very important. If we've convinced someone that grace is a real relational concept, then what is the order? Where do we get the order wrong? How do we go back and maybe right some wrongs and clean some things up? The reason I'm trying to tease this out is because I feel like you and the guys that have been working inside men's communities literally for decades, all jokes aside, you have a very different order of grace than most people do. And let me just describe quickly, without us chasing a church rant, that the order of grace is usually sit in a room, have official spiritual cosmic pardon declared over you, and then after that go out and live differently, because you're so deeply grateful that you got out of spiritual jail that you're never going to do that again. That is the interpretation that I had growing up, that so many of the men that are my clients sit with. It is asphyxiating, it's debilitating, but we adopt it and we try to live it out. So the order of operation when it comes to grace, because we certainly can't offer something to someone else that we haven't experienced ourselves. Even we can read a lot of books and watch a lot of YouTube, but we can talk a lot of the language. So how do we go about doing this? I'll explain this as the way that I've interpreted it over the years, and you could correct me. But the experience of grace relationally first occurs with a fellow human being, that it is not an intellectual concept that we lift out of Paul. Even though we don't call this the Sex, Emotional Health, and Chaos podcast. We call it the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast. It's a huge part of the equation here, but I first experienced it with other men. Okay. Then I get an idea of what the concept actually is about, and I go to see what God has to say about it, and I experience it then from God. And then step 3, I'm able to authentically offer it to other people in my life, not just my spouse, but my children and my closest friends, and even strangers that disagree with me politically or on the gender issue. If which drives me mad, that's even an issue. But I can sit in those conversations and experiences with grace as long as I have done those things in that order. So as my former therapist, does that ring true to what you would say is the order?
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, as you said, it's like you can't give something that you ain't got, right? I have to be able to have received grace. I have to have administered that grace to myself and to others on an emotional level, right? Where I know it's true up here, but I also feel it, that emotional part of the brain, right? 2 hemispheres. And then that becomes a reality. And so often I sit with a lot of I'll just say helper types. I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. I won't go on a rant. But
Good.
a lot of helper types, they've got the knowledge of it, but they've never come to that experiential part. And the experiential part is always relational and emotional, because they are still hiding. They haven't really come clean. They can talk about a sin in general, but they haven't come to specific confessing of their own sin. And I'm not talking about there's some sexual deviant, whatever.
Yeah.
They certainly could be, but it may just be how you talk to your wife, how you treat her, what you say to her is mean. It's passive aggressive. There's all kind of things that don't line up with the reality of who we say we are as believers, right? And those are always behavioral issues. And so if you haven't even come to awareness of the fact that you are missing the mark, sin, right? That's what it literally means. And so I've got to become aware that I am missing the mark in whatever form that takes. And then it has to be to I actually feel bad about this thing that I continue to do that I can't stop doing on my own. Because we all try, right? And we all know we can't. Well, those of us that are kind of on this side of the freedom walk with Jesus,
Yep.
but there's a lot of guys that are bound up in that unawareness, and they've never come to that place of just awareness of even their own behaviors. Their wife's probably trying to tell them. Others are probably trying to tell them in some way, shape, or form, but they've never hit the wall of pain. To get to that place where it's like, oh my gosh, man, I see that I am. I once was blind, and now I see. To tie it back in
There you
to
go.
the song, right? But I think it's like that experience in order to get to the place of grace, a real place of grace. I think we have to kind of come to that it's that first step of certainly, man, I mean, that's the Jesus part, right? Sunday
Hmm.
school. And then I've got to begin to put myself in a position to be able to sit with other men and have those things, those blind spots. We all have them. Otherwise, we wouldn't call them blind spots if we knew, right? And so I need to be open to receiving from other people of how they experience me. And that's a grace component, because like if I've got to trust this guy or these men. I got to trust that they got my best interest at heart, right? And then
Hmm.
I have to have, and hopefully it's two-way, and I'm having to administer grace to them in this journey, and then they are administering grace to me, but we're really beginning to practice intimacy. I mean, it's deep relationship is what's
Hmm.
really going on with all of this. And
Yeah.
if I cannot, I've got to practice it there, because my wife is probably hurt, mad at me, doesn't want to talk to me because I've been a mean SOB. Again,
Mhm.
forget acting out sexually. I'm just talking about relational functionality.
That's it. And I definitely want to hang on that point very quickly here as we wrap. That so many times in the recovery and addiction world, people start to believe I'm only having to live this way because I was a sexual deviant, or because my spouse did this thing. Now we're having to live this way. And with this concept, that is actually not true. That every
Mm-mm.
person alive should be living this way. How we explain it is a marriage can only bear so much weight. That bridge can only bear so much weight. And if I'm going to Cammie and I am asking her to be the first drop of grace in my 50-gallon drum, and I do that over and over and over again, then she's going to start getting tired of being the only person that is trying to fill that bucket up. And I think, this could be an episode in and of itself. We have a lot of different
Oh yeah.
buckets in our lives. But when we're going to our spouse, whether we've had, porn addiction or adultery or not in our marriage, one of the basic concepts is I don't go to my spouse first for these things. And this is in direct opposition to the teaching, many teachings in Christian marriage, that they're your best friend. The two becoming one means that you're
Mm.
looking to them first. You're never looking to any other resource. Well, we put God first, but really
Mm.
the main relationship in our life is our marriage, and we should be the old couple. Speaking of Nicholas Sparks, that's dying in the bed together. Like, what?
Oh
This
yeah.
is a very strange
Just
concept. Um,
very twisted. Yeah.
it is, but so many of us are living under that burden, and I find that especially couples who have experienced reality and hurt, public hurt, they labor under the burden that most other couples, or many other couples, and especially the couples that I go to church with, they don't have to live this way because they don't have
Oh
this
yeah.
in their history. And I picked the wrong person, and I've been the wrong person. No, 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 no. If you're to that point in this episode, you need to hear from both of us that all couples should be living this way, that we should initially experience grace in same sex relationships and deep community, intimate connection that's been built over a long period of time, so that we don't come to our marriages needy, and we're not putting our spouses in a place they were never, ever, ever
Mm.
intended to hold, so that we can, from the overflow, getting into some Christian teaching here that's actually correct, from the overflow of what we've experienced in our relationship with God and others, then we can be that person in our marriage, that we can lead. And let's pick on another false Christian teaching, that leading means being a dictator inside of our home and demanding that everyone sit down at dinner and do a devotion out of some really crummy Christian book. No, 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 no. What if we lead in our marriage by saying, I've experienced the love of God today. I've experienced the love of my community today. And through that overflow, I'm bringing that love into my family dynamic. And it means that I'm not first seeking for my needs to be met here today, tonight in the living room. I can now look to meet your need, even if that means, as you pointed out earlier today, even if that means taking ownership for my mistakes, I can do that. I can do that.
Yeah.
Today for you, I can do that. It doesn't mean that I'm a piece of crap, that I have to buy into the core belief that I don't deserve forgiveness or a happy life or a life full of purpose. It does mean, though, that I can take ownership for that action or that inaction, and it doesn't have to define me, and I can meet you where you are. That's really what we're trying to describe today. Again, after that initial phase, and it's different lengths of time for different couples, after that initial phase of we're just acknowledging and addressing the hurt, then I can start to lead this way, and I'll tee this up for you to close the episode. We don't have to wait on our spouses to start living this way. We can start today.
Ah, boy. Certainly, that's one of the myths. It's like, and really, that's just really kind of it's a childish way of approaching a marriage. It's like, well, I always say, it's like two kids playing in the sandbox, and somebody throws sand in the other's eye, and then all of a sudden we're hitting each other over the head with Tonka trucks. But it's kind of a tit for tat, well, she won't do this, and so I'm not going to do that, and she says this, and it's just like, man, just stop building your case. How about somebody at some point is going to have to be the adult, and they're going to have to step out of the sandbox, and let's quit playing in the sandbox, and let's really figure out what it means to grow up, become emotionally regulated, because that's one of the biggest issues, is just emotional dysregulation, and relationally functional. And all of those things are skill sets that everybody can learn if you're willing to, and if you're open to it. And I think, one of the biggest myths, it just in general, especially in church world, it's like every couple we sit with thinks that all these other couples at church, in their small group and in their whatever, is like, oh wow, they see their post on Facebook, and it's like, boy, they really have it together. Their marriage, I know, it's so great. And even are always like, yeah, you might be surprised, right? And it is such a, I truly, it is a rare thing. When we meet a couple, they probably wouldn't be coming into our office. Um, we know very, very, very few couples that actually have the marriage that we kind of believe God intended us to have. Just deep connection, an abiding, knowing love, and still like each other after being married forever. That's a unicorn. And so, don't get caught up in this idea of I call it the fake book marriage world, because it's not real. It can be, but it takes a lot of effort. Even when there's been some form of betrayal. Obviously, we have experienced that, and we have witnessed and seen and watched other couples get to that place as well. Nothing greater.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.